All right, I'd like to invite Rita back to the show. This is the second time we've been together, and the last time was amazing, powerful, so many golden nuggets. But we could talk about this stuff for days. So I said you got to come back and we got to, break it up. Whatever we miss on today, because the last time we missed a couple of things and a couple of people mentioned it. So we're like, okay, we're gonna try to hit it today. But then whatever we miss today, we're gonna have to keep getting it. So why don't we keep this going? You come back every couple of months, and then we'll, if anybody's got some things they want us to cover, leave it in the comments, and we'll hit it next time. No big deal. We'll just keep her coming
Yeah.
back because it's the stuff to talk about. So without further ado, give us the stuff. Give us the goods.
Okay, Helmut, thanks so much for having me back for non-core.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be here. Our last discussion sparked a lot of ideas for me and a lot of finer points that I hope could be helpful to your viewers. And after we spoke, I actually remembered some things that I had forgotten, which when I say forgotten, it's code for repressed. And repression is actually a motivated form of forgetting, if you will. And so as human beings, we have this tendency to minimize and even deny our past suffering and traumas. And it struck me how much I still do that today, actually. And, TMS is often called the smiling disease. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No.
Yeah, the smiling disease, because we're so worried about the feelings of others and not making anyone uncomfortable that we put on this happy, agreeable facade to the world. And Dr. Sarno referred to the true self that we hide from others as the beleaguered self, and what Jung called the shadow side. Um,
Right.
and I know you just had a guest on who spoke about Jung.
I was just gonna say that. Sam
Yes,
Miller. Yeah, she mentioned that. She loves
I'm a
Carl
I'm a
Jung
big
or
fan of Jung as well. Yes. And I think often us TMSers, we can be recounting something painful with a cheerful smile, and and we could find ourselves, reflexively agreeing with everything anyone says when inwardly we really don't. And
Yep.
just because we don't want to ruffle feathers, and
Yep.
the smile can actually even become, in some cases, almost a frozen feature. And
Mhm.
I'm guilty myself of smiling and laughing when I'm actually distressed. It's I've always
Right.
been that way. And I can remember this one time when I was in my 20s, and this guy stood me up on a date. And
Yep.
the next day I was sharing the story with my coworker in this really lighthearted way, when all of a sudden tears started rolling down my face. And the dissonance was so great that I was laughing and crying at the same
Yep.
time. And it was so mortifying, of course, but wasn't one of my finest moments. But
Yep.
it really illustrates the tendency to see only the negative about ourselves, that I had been rejected, while emitting the good side to others, like, oh, it's no big deal. But thus we have
Yeah.
inner conflict that ensues.
It seems like it was trying to come out, but you weren't allowing it to fully, you weren't allowing yourself to be your authentic self. So it's kind of, yeah, like you said, a little bit of a battle.
You're absolutely right. It's this inner cognitive, this dissonance and this mismatch between our uh, affect and what we're actually feeling. And it does create this inner tension and inner war, if you will. And
Yep.
so, when it comes to our hurts and our traumas, we don't always want to see it, but we need to, in order to propel our lives forward. And an important thing to recognize is that the bookend to trauma is power. And while cognitive healing, which is what we discussed on the last podcast, leads to symptom relief, emotional healing will lead to life relief. And so if you go on this journey, you can take advantage and, not only eliminate your symptoms, but have a better life. And so it can also lead to spiritual expansion as well. And so the role of emotions in our health is fundamental. And so today I thought it would be useful to explore some of the ways that medical trauma slash the shadow side of medicine and um, and emotional trauma slash the shadow side of the psyche play a role in TMS, as well as the ways that they often run parallel to each other, they mirror each other, and they intersect with doubt, with the cognitive, with the thoughts, right? So, at the most basic level, when we're talking about TMS recovery, we're looking at thoughts and emotions, and intellect and feelings are dichotomous. So when we're trying to slay doubt, like I spoke of last time, we need objectivity. So that means, like logic and facts and science. But when we're integrating and processing and relating to our emotions and complex trauma in a genuine way, we need subjectivity. So they're really different. And subjectivity involves, empathy and values and harmony and more amorphous things like that, right? And so I think, TMSers are, for the most part, we're intellectualizers, suppressors,
Hmm.
repressaholics, worrywarts, and rationalizers. And it's all to avoid hurt. We're trying to avoid hurt. And Eckhart Tolle wrote, feeling will get you closer to the truth of who you are than thinking. And this is ultimately the goal. It's not just to
Yeah.
get rid of symptoms, it's to understand ourselves. It's to be genuinely curious about our own psychology. And so this journey is a psychological one. You can't solve a problem. I think Einstein had a quote, you
Yeah.
can't solve a problem from the same consciousness that created it. So
Right.
this happened due to psychological reasons, and we have to go back to that if we want to genuinely change and have a great life. So
Which is true. It's not just about the symptoms. It's about, for me, my journey taught me how to react to life situations like business, relationships, just life situations like curveballs that it throws at me. And I literally treat it the same way I did a symptom. I would
yeah,
acknowledge it, feel the feelings about it, get angry, get upset, get worried, have a little freak show, like be freaked out a little bit, let it do its thing. And then I would expose myself to it, to the root of it. Like, what is bugging me? Why am I fearful of this? Okay, let's expose myself to it. And then be, in a way, ask for more. And then till I become neutral to that which I don't like. And then eventually, I surrender and I engage in life, and that
yeah,
it just works out for my benefit. What I want ends up happening, and that's exactly what I
absolutely.
did for symptoms.
And so not only do as a byproduct of this work, get rid of your symptoms in a sense, but you get to live without fear. You get to go through life uh, with a fraction of the fear you once had. And, absolutely, physical symptoms can be put in the same construct as emotions. As you know, for every emotion, there's a physical corollary. So, you often hear this question raised in the mind body world. Do I need to do a lot of emotional work? People will often ask that. And the answer to that is it depends. It really depends. And so I have a little visual aid, and please excuse my poor artwork because I'm no Leonardo da Vinci. And,
Right.
Leonardo was famous for his mirror writing. And so I am neither an artist or a mirror writer.
Yeah,
So
that's smart. The
you
mirror, because of
have to
the
bear
way it
with
picks it up. Yeah.
and I'm also, for the record, I'm not a statistician. So this is based solely on my own personal
Right.
observations from
Right.
speaking to thousands of people over the past 11 years or so. So,
Yeah.
so basically, I drew this wonderfully technical graph of a continuum of the TMS sufferers. There's a continuum, okay? And so on one pole of the spectrum, we have the cognitive over here.
Yeah.
And as we travel towards the other pole, the emotional aspect starts to weigh more heavily. And the cause of symptoms can span all the way from learned habits
Yep.
to deeper emotional processes. So here you could hypothetically have a person who just like reads a book and they get better overnight, hypothetically. And then here you could have a person with maybe a much higher trauma load that's
Right.
has a great difficulty accessing their emotions, for example. And so from what I've observed, I think there's a certain percentage of people, I would say about 20%, that only need to do this pain reprocessing piece, this cognitive piece, maybe like a DNSR type of thing, as an example. And that's really just so they can get rid of the fear of their symptoms and the fears about their triggers. But then I think there's about 80% of us, of humans, who need, who also need anywhere from just, um, you know, simple awareness to their emotions to deeper therapy, right? And in
Yep.
my opinion, I would say that about 60% in this group would benefit from a little bit of, group coaching or one-on-one coaching. So I really think it benefits most people. Some people might need a little more help, and some people might need a little less help. And this is a picture of me. So I was one of the
Nice.
people that I needed more, not so much intensive therapy, but I needed ongoing
Yep.
coaching for a few months, right? So I'm kind of like on the border of, I'm at the high end of the emotional and,
Yeah.
but I didn't need like a year of intense trauma therapy, for example, so,
Right.
and some people need that, and that's fine. And so the question is, how does doubt, which is a cognitive category, intersect with emotions? So if we zoom out at the TMS journey, it can look like a roller coaster ride without a seatbelt, right? So so if we look at doubt, it's similar with doubt. There's actually a river called the River of Doubt, and it's in the Amazonian rainforest, and in Portuguese it's called Orio de Duvida. And I'm gonna weave in some like historical stories and anecdotes. So I might ramble a bit, but
That's okay.
there's this incredible story about this river of doubt, and it's attached to the expedition of Theodore Roosevelt. He went on this an unbelievably harrowing expedition on this river, and they really should make a movie out of it. I don't know why they haven't made a movie, but they
Yeah.
need to. So anyway, Roosevelt was a man of such intrepidness, and he also suffered. He was a real man's man. He wasn't afraid of anything. And he also suffered his own emotionally devastating blows. His mother and his wife died on the same day. Can you imagine? On the same day. And he
Oh.
just kept, soldiering on. And one time he was giving a speech and he was shot um, in the chest while he was giving the
Yep.
speech. And he finished the 90-minute speech with the bullet
Wow.
in his chest. And then he collapsed afterwards. But just to give you an idea of what Roosevelt was like. And so, back to this Amazonian mission again, it was through this ink black crocodile infested tributary that it defied direction, it twisted and turned, and it doubled back and forth. If you look at the maps of the
Yep.
river, it's unbelievable. And so
Wow.
and he did all this in the height of the rainy season. And throughout the trip, they had starvation and poisonous spiders and crocodiles
Hmm.
and angry natives shooting arrows at him. And not once did Roosevelt succumb to this, his doubting shadow side, right? And
Right. Yeah.
there's this quote by Will Rogers, the comedian, where he says, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. So doubt is counting on you to forget what you already know. In a sense, we get amnesia. And when we
Yep.
get emotionally triggered, when we're emotionally triggered or stressful situation comes up that affects our self-image, or we get, knocked into trauma, even momentarily, like having an emotional flashback or CPTSD, as they call it, doubt will swoop in and capitalize on that. And it's sort of like the mafia. It's doubt is like the mafia, like in the words of Michael Corleone in The Godfather, when he says, just when you think you're out, it keeps pulling you back in. And
Yep.
doubt has this like regressive pull, a lot like the mafia. And so I'm going to take you and the viewer on a little voyage
Sure.
through thoughts and emotions. So this is going to be a voyage I'm going to kind of try to take you through.
Sure.
And we're going to double back to the jungle of symptoms and the medical mill, and then onwards by sea, all the way to the wild moors of Scotland, and eventually to an Edenic manicured garden of emotions. And in honor
Nice.
of your moniker, Mindful Gardener, helmet, it's a garden.
No, nice. Yeah, I know the gardener.
This is Wiki Bunny. That's my my handle on the TMS Wiki. So our destination is this place.
Right.
So, um, just as a disclaimer for anybody watching, if you want to skip over the Amazonian leg of the trip, in which I'm going to touch on symptoms and leverage some critiques, and you want to jump on to the sea portion where I go into the part about emotions, you can forward to another timestamp, and it's probably going to be around the 20-minute mark. So if you don't want to
Nice.
hear about the shadow side of medicine or symptoms, you can skip over that and go right to the juicy emotional stuff if you prefer. So, but before
Okay.
that, I just want to preface that when it comes to the truth, and this includes history, we shouldn't fear it. We can learn a lot from it and make
Mhm.
different choices. So here goes. So I'm going to take some
All
water.
right. Give her. Yeah.
I
Me too.
talked a lot. So, anytime we're recalling a medical event, a procedure, words of an expert, or even when we enter into a practitioner's office, we need to put on our doubt armor. We
Mhm.
also need to be educated health consumers, which is something your guest Brianna touched on. We need to realize that the thoughts we choose are more important than the treatments we choose. So,
Yeah.
according to the biologist, Dr. Bruce Lipton, I don't know if you've ever read Biology of Belief. I recommend it by Bruce
Yeah. I
Lipton.
followed some of his stuff. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, so he said that 80% of illness will heal with or without treatment. So basically the tincture of time, and a mere 10% are helped by medical intervention, and drugs barely outperform placebos in drug trials.
Wow.
So in the shadow of science, so we look at science overall. In its shadow, we have two main um, rabbit holes, I guess you could say, which are
Yeah.
malpractice and quackery. So,
Hmm.
healthcare in general can often be, very perplexing and contradictory, and information is complex, and health fraud is widespread, and the marketplace is jam-packed with dubious products and treatments, and lack of health insurance in the US is at crisis levels right now. And unnecessary surgeries are a significant problem in our society. And there's also a misuse of statistics and misrepresented, skewed data, including, and this comes up a lot in the mind body world,
Yep.
conflation, correlation with causation. Correlation and causation are not the same. And
Mhm.
also, just lack of trustworthy sources like, uh, advertising, books, educational institutions that offer these unscientific coursework, internet propaganda. So we're
Yep.
surrounded, and the social menace and intellectual hypocrisy of quackery, which in my opinion should really be called vulturism, because quackery makes you think of like really cute, adorable ducks.
Yeah.
Basically, quackery is defined as the promotion of false or unproven method for profit. And fraud involves
Right.
it's deceit. And so purveyors of quackery are really adept at buzzwords and slogans. And so, in the 70s, the word natural was used a lot. And then in the 80s, the word holistic became very popularized.
Right.
And then now you hear a lot alternative, complementary, functional. These are our
Right.
modern day buzzwords. And the truth is, most of us take vitamins that we don't really need,
Yep.
that build up in our system to toxic levels sometimes. We buy things that are touted as organic that are not always safer or more nutritious necessarily. And, on the
Yep.
other side of the coin from quackery, we have the medical mainstream. So on the other side of alternative, we've got the mainstream, right? So in that shadow, we have malpractice, which the definition of malpractice is the failure of a health professional to meet accepted standard of diagnosis and treatment. And we
Hmm.
know that the more susceptible the sufferer will be to promises of a cure, as well as fad and in vogue diagnostic labels such as, mast cell activation syndrome, multiple chemical
Hmm.
sensitivity, chronic fatigue, which used to be called neurasthenia back in the Victorian times,
Wow.
IB irritable bowel, which used to be called colitis back in the day, chronic candida, mold toxicity, chronic Lyme, Epstein-Barr, which used to be called the yuppie flu in the 80s, um,
Mm.
embedded infections, multiple viruses, SIBO, stiff man syndrome, the one that
Dion.
Celine Dion, and also your guest yesterday, Sam, it
Yeah.
used to be called catalepsy. So during the Victorian times, it was actually very fashionable for upper class ladies to have catalepsy, and they would have these like, pseudo seizures, if you will. But I,
Wow.
but anyway, so whatever new one pops up on the daily, we're susceptible to quackery and malpractice. And so,
Hmm.
when I describe the symptoms that I suffered myself, I'm always inclined to downplay them, but I remembered more details after our last podcast. And so
Yes.
I think it's good to discuss because they demonstrate concepts to which we can all relate. And so
Yeah.
one of the doctors, I had given you a litany of funny doctor names. One of the doctors I forgot to mention was one that he was a surgeon, and I call him Dr. Pompous. And
Yeah.
this guy was only too gleeful to like place a spinal cord stimulator in my back. And on another side note, with my son, I encountered a lot of this type of thing as well. There were surgeons at a top hospital in New York City, Columbia, and my son had constipation issues, and they were
Mm.
ready to give him a really barbaric surgery, which involved a colostomy bag when he was little. And luckily, I didn't listen to them either. I didn't listen to the spinal cord stimulator guy. I didn't listen to them.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
but you have to be really careful. And I also tested positive for the EMG and nerve biopsy tests, which a lot of your guests have mentioned. And
Yeah.
and why is that? Because they're false positives.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, this is all too predictable and common. I expect people to get a positive result
Yeah,
because
exactly.
these tests reflect a moment in time of the effect, not the cause.
Right.
So, so
That makes, I like the way you say that. The moment in time, right? If you're in a state of fight or flight and they want to, this is why I'm like, it's almost not good to just, you got to rule out things to be safe, of course. But if you're
yeah.
going to look for something, you're going to find some shit, right? If they check out your biome, they check out all kinds of things, right? They're going to find some things and that just adds more labels. That adds more, right?
Yes, absolutely. The more you search, the more confusion will ensue, and the more doubt will feed on that. And at my very worst, as I told you last time, I had allodynia and hyperalgesia that were so acute that just even a light breeze or a feathery touch would caused me to vomit and pain. And
Yeah.
both of my legs were lobster red. And I actually ended up going to a knee surgeon who she wrote in her notes because I peeked in the folder. She wrote extreme rubris, and which is extreme redness. And some people
Right.
even, they can have changes to their nails and they can grow hair. And I met one lady who had CRPS in her scalp and she had to wear a wig. And another lady who had it in her stomach. And I also, people can get their feet or hands or their limbs can swell up like balloons to gargantuan sizes. Like a hand could become like a catcher's mitt. I mean, I have really large hands, but these are my natural hands. Um, and so, I also I wanted to tell you this funny story that I forgot last time that is, I think it's really
Yeah.
a cool story. So my Achilles tendons were um, really swollen, and this story is going to demonstrate the nocebo effect in action. So I went to my pain management doctor to get steroid injections in my Achilles tendons, and so of course I was terrified, and I closed my eyes and I could feel this giant massive needle piercing my tendons and penetrating. And I screamed so loud that I think the entire New York City block of Manhattan could hear me. And then I hear, Rita, Rita. And I like opened my eyelids and I looked across the room and the doctor was literally across the room. He was like 20 feet away from me. He was nowhere near me. The syringes were still in the plastic packaging.
Yeah.
He hadn't opened them yet, but I felt that needle. It felt that real. And
Yes.
he was in shock. And it was such a light bulb moment for me because I realized that, my brain, this is how powerful my brain is. And
Yep.
it was a good experience for me because I realized, wow, if I could think that, I can also do the
Hmm.
opposite. And so another thing I forgot to mention last time was that I also ended up in the ER several times after being prescribed fentanyl patches and methadone and other opiates. And, my body, I just don't tolerate those types of drugs. So I would end up in the ER. And so, when I hit rock bottom, it felt like my entire body felt as though somebody had poured gasoline on me and lit a match within my veins. That's what it felt like. And I didn't tell this gory story the last time because I have this tendency to downplay my trauma, but this is medical trauma. And so,
Yeah.
I was screaming all night, I think for 18 hours straight, just begging for death, essentially. And my
Yeah.
pain management doctor, he was kind enough to rush me in. He gave me like this emergency cocktail of ketamine and anesthesia. Now, these ketamine infusions, I had them about 5 times. It only dialed it down a little bit that one time where I was just ready to jump off a bridge. But the other time,
Yeah.
it didn't help. And after the infusions, I would vomit, I would be very sick. And even though that when I hit rock bottom, it helped me a tiny bit, I continued to deteriorate that summer. So I continued to go downhill and I ended up bedbound. And I,
It's interesting
yeah,
hearing this. I know I'm sorry to cut you off.
no, no, go
It's
ahead, go ahead.
interesting how it's interesting how far the brain will go to keep you alive and to scream at you that there's danger there and how it will keep doing it,
Yes,
right? And it just
yeah,
shows me like everything you're talking about. It's the brain screaming to keep
yeah,
you safe.
yes, it serves a purpose. And
It's almost to me, I know you went through a lot of terror, but it's almost amazing how it's working like this, right? Unbelievable.
it's so ingrained into our survival, our we're designed to survive. so that's what makes us actually really strong. It's actually an asset. But when we don't understand what's going on, we can feel victimized and we can feel powerless. But actually, we have all the power. And so something I wanted to mention as well that I forgot last time is that. So I had mentioned last time that people get amputations. They get these harrowing
Yes.
amputations for CRPS, and of course it it doesn't solve the problem because the pain is in the brain, it's not in the limb. But there were also something that doesn't get that might not be that well known is that there were ketamine comas conducted in Germany and in Mexico. And I think aren't you half half and half, Helmet?
Yeah, yeah, I just shit.
Yeah, so it was illegal in the
Yeah,
US, probably illegal in Canada, probably illegal everywhere, but they were doing it in Mexico and Germany for a while. And so people with the most severe symptomology, they would essentially risk their lives to undergo these 9-day long comas. They would be put into a coma. And
right.
in theory, it sounds plausible because it's like, well, we'll unplug this person's brain and then they can sort of reboot. And that's kind of the theory. Like we can kind of like ketamine, we can disassociate and reboot them. But the catch is that when they come out of the coma, their psychology comes back online. So all of their old thoughts and fears come rushing back because
Program.
no matter what
Yeah, the
you do,
program.
you can't escape your psychology. And so
Right.
that's why this journey is all about our psychology at the end of the day. And so,
Yeah.
whatever ameliorative effects that a person could get from ketamine or a ketamine coma would be temporary at best.
In
And
a way,
yeah,
it's like a computer, right? You can change the software, which changes everything, or you can try to unplug it. You plug it back in, it's still running the software.
exactly, exactly, exactly. And the worst case scenario actually happened with these comas. Some people died. There were some deaths, and they had to close. These clinics got shut down. They're completely illegal.
Right.
There were lawsuits galore, and so and even ketamine infusions are very traumatic. I had a lot of PTSD. I had a lot of medical trauma, and so. And speaking of Germany, going back to Germany, I have a fun fact, like a little detour into the shadow side of history. And so during World War II, the Nazis wanted to cut costs. So they initiated this whole entire alternative industry of medicine. So there was
Mm.
the Minister of Propaganda, Goebbels. He introduced a law that was meant to end precisely when the war ended. So it was only supposed to be for the time that the war was transpiring. And the idea was that they were going to appoint these folk healers or herbalists, and they were going to call them Heilpraktikers. And they were going to do this to make the civilians happy while the real doctors were off treating the troops in battle. So they wanted to make the German civilians feel like they had great medical care, but the real doctors were, helping the troops. So the intention behind the scenes was that these incompetents, as Goebbels referred to them, or fake doctors with no medical training, basically, they would be used for show during the war. And
Yeah.
they would be disposed of and banned once the wartime ended. They would be all gone, basically. But here's where an ironic twist happened. So, and this is why history is so fascinating. So,
Yeah.
in 1957, homeopaths, naturopaths, and water cures by Dr. Kniep. I don't know if you've ever heard that guy. I think he was German.
No.
So they were deemed legal in West Germany under their democracy because, as you know, West and East and West Germany were divided. And so
Yeah.
West Germany, because it was a democracy, they essentially legitimized this fake um, medical industry, and thus the alternative industry was born, and the legacy of junk science remains to this day. And to
Mm.
this day, Germany and much of Europe and even in America, we have a thriving alternative industry. And
Okay.
even in media we see a proliferation of ads for things like faddish detoxing cures or water
Right.
cures or cold water plunges or fancy ion bottles that they're selling and hydrogen water and all of this thing. And if you look at the history, it was all the birthplace of it was Germany. And
Yeah.
the Germans to this day, they love that stuff. They love naturopathy, homeopathy. And I know I'm going to have people come for me in the comments, but that's okay.
Yeah, whatever.
But yeah, that's where it all started. So I think it's important to understand the history and where it came from and just how fraudulent it is. Um,
Yeah.
and how political agendas are often behind medical, um, it's really they disguise themselves as science and medicine, but what it really is activism. It's political activism, with the illusion of science. So anyway, so returning back to the experts and the
Yeah.
importance of not being enslaved by their methodology. There's also a huge emotional component that comes with the medical world. And I wanted to talk about this medical
Hmm.
trauma. So, medical trauma often reenacts and reactivates childhood trauma and attachment ruptures that maybe we had with our parents, for example. And so, when
Hmm.
we're faced with an archetypal figure or authority figure like a physician, we're vulnerable to betraying our own best judgment and handing our power over to these practitioners who are not deities or demigods, as we know. And
Yeah.
they're just humans and they have their own anxieties and fears and doubts and blind spots. And
Yep.
they often unwittingly recreate these themes from our lives of broken promises, abandonment, even infliction of harm. Think about people we
Hmm.
love that hurt us. And so it's important to understand that medical trauma, in and of itself, can be quite shame inducing and PTSD producing. And it's enough of
Yep.
a reason to get TMS. Medical trauma alone is more
Yeah.
than enough of a reason.
You could just have one, be a normal person, had a normal life, have one event happen, and then you have anxiety, and then you get scared of the anxiety or whatever symptom, and then that's enough
Right.
to fuel it.
Right, exactly. And I had this a historical example I wanted to give because
Yeah.
it's really dramatic. So it's this basically in this story, desperation, emotional trauma, TMS, and predation all collided in this one historical story. And some people might be familiar, you might be familiar with the story, but it's the story of the Tsarina Alexandra Romanov and her little son Alexei. And this particular story really tugs at my heartstrings deeply because as a mom, I could so relate to her, you know. So the Tsarina Alexandra was terrified because her son Alexei had hemophilia, which is a cruel genetic bleeding disease. And she had to watch her son suffer in the most horrible, horrible of ways. And at that
Mm.
time in the early 1900s, little was known about this affliction. And there were no treatments for it, of course. And so enter in this picture, this wandering mystic guy. His name was Grigory Rasputin. Have you ever heard of Rasputin?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so he claimed to have these healing powers, and so he ingratiated himself with the family, with the Tsar and the Tsarina. And during this particularly excruciating episode in 1912, when Alexei had a hemorrhage in his leg and he was close to death from a high fever, the panicked Tsarina allowed Rasputin to treat her fragile son because she was desperate. And so, you know, Rasputin was a master at playing on people's weaknesses, and he was also if you know his story, he was a total degenerate in his real life. He presented as this weird mystical priest, but his real
Yeah.
life total debauchery. So if you look Google him, you'll see his picture. You'll have
Yeah.
some nightmares. But anyway, so
Yeah.
you know, he had these like hypnotic eyes that would calm the child down. And so there were several factors that went into the alleviation of symptoms for in this boy's episode. One was these like mesmerizing eyes. And one
Mm.
was the simple fact that all diseases ebb and flow anyway. So, you know, even without the presence of Rasputin, it would have dialed down a little bit at some point, whether he was there or not. Of
Yeah.
course, he took credit, you know. Um,
Mm.
and then the other factor, which is really interesting, is that he instructed the physicians not to give the boy any aspirin, which
Right.
would have been an anti-clotting agent. And that was something they didn't know at the time. So if they had given him aspirin, they would have killed him immediately. So, and he had
Mm.
a fever, and normally you give aspirin. So he's like, don't give them aspirin. And they listened to him. So,
Mm.
you know, you can't blame you can't blame the poor mom who would give anything to ease her son's pain, of course. And
Mm.
it's very easy to have compassion for her. But I read some biographies um, about this family, and the thing about Alexandra that really jumped out at me, that the mom, is that she had TMS during this time. So
Mm.
she developed such severe sciatica, and she was not an old, you know, she was a youngish woman, probably in her 30s, maybe. Yeah, she was pretty young, you know, and she
Yeah.
would need special wheelchairs, and she would often retreat to her room for days. And her 4 daughters were told, you know, not to disturb their mother in any way because she was stressed. And if you Google it, there's a picture of her in the wheelchair. You can find a picture. But the poor girls, they would write letters to their dear mama that
Mm.
they hoped she was feeling better. Like, dear mama, I hope you're feeling better. She was like in the other wing of the castle or whatever. And so
Yeah.
it's just
Wow.
it's a really interesting snapshot of medicine and psychosomatic medicine in a historical context, because you have this perfect storm of every, you know, shadow side and
Mm.
uh, and psychological manipulation. And so
Yeah.
anyway, that was my little story. But from the Tsarina's TMS, we're going to now voyage onwards towards the sea of emotions. So people who might have skipped the first part, we're going into emotions now. Going back to from the Tsarina's TMS, we're going to now voyage onwards towards the sea of emotions and psychological defenses and personality traits that emerge from childhood wounds at the causal level. And the emotions and the impulses that get cast into the shadow of our psyche. Um, so so, you know, Freud quipped, life is not easy. And neither is recovery from mind body issues or TMS, and neither is recovery from emotional hurts, you know.
Yeah.
And in order to navigate the rocky waters of childhood, we build these boats called defenses. And, you know, some common defenses are, um, you know, denial, repression, uh, projection, sublimation, reaction formation. But the last stop on the defense train is TMS. And I think it's worth noting it's the only human defense that's designed to protect the sufferer as well as others around them. And
Mm,
you can see how the people's brains who choose this defense are typically really lovely, good hearted people. So anyway,
mm,
yeah, so, you know, defense mechanisms are just ways that the ego deals with overwhelming anxiety, basically.
mm,
And, you know, Freud, going back to Freud, he enumerated three types of anxiety. There's one is realistic, like being thrown in a pit of snakes. That would be realistic.
mm,
Two is neurotic, like fear of losing control. And
mm,
the thirdly, moral anxiety. And this moral anxiety is the soil in which TMS flourishes. And it's really
mm.
about the superego in overdrive, and it's driven by shame and guilt and fear of punishment. And
Yeah.
you know, Dr. Sarno was great at reading people, and he noticed certain patterns in his patients, and he became very interested in the characterological aspects. And while personality psychology, or the field of, they call it personology, it's the most philosophical branch of psychology. It's actually the richest one. And Sarno came to the conclusion that the number one factor determining whether or not a person developed mind body symptoms were certain personality traits. So basically, the the TMS is like the malady of the perfect and the good, so to speak.
Right.
And so there's this quote by Shakespeare: virtue itself turns vice, being misapplied. And in other words, these positive pro-social characteristics can get turned into a psychological defense that ends up hurting us. And so, you know, perfectionism and its moral equivalent, which is called goodism, stem from a need to be liked and accepted, and they provide this illusion of emotional safety. Um,
Yeah.
and you know, Sarno called it the type T personality, which encompasses traits such as, you know, being your own worst critic, being highly responsible, conscientious, overly accommodating, conflict avoidant, perfectionism, being a
Yep.
worrier, having a strong inner drive for success, the need for control, compulsivity, and striving, just to give you, to paint a picture. And, you know, he deduced that these traits, they're not inscribed in our DNA, but they're really actually, they're rather learned coping styles, and even trauma responses, in some cases. And our chronic tensive thoughts that arise from our personality then interact with stressful life situations, which in turn initiates the pain symptom cycle. And as we
Mhm.
know, you know, TMS has many monikers like mind-body syndrome, psychophysiologic disorder, somatoform disorder, conversion disorder, somatization, neuroplastic pain, and functional
Yep.
anxiety, and many others. I only named a few. But in an, you know, in a nutshell, what are all those fancy terms? It just means anxiety. And
Mm,
the roots of anxiety and depression lie in our inner psychic conflict. And in a nutshell, who we are is how we hurt. And
mm.
so
Yep.
we suffer when we live a life not consistent with our true selves, but instead as
Right.
others want us to live, or as we think they want us to live. And
Mm.
we often feel forced to choose between gaining approval of others or being ourselves. And some of us even grow up with the added pressure of the social imperative and, keeping up appearances. And so it really, this all boils down to that adage of to thine own self be true, which is my favorite
Yeah.
favorite quote. And that was certainly the case for me. It wasn't until I was almost 50 years old that I realized I had a right to my life. And between now and dead, I didn't
What
want,
was that quote again? I'm still trying to remember. What was that quote?
to thine own self be true. Shakespeare.
That's amazing.
Yep. No, it's really words to live by. And I wasn't living by that adage. And I didn't want to keep living that way. And there's this it's also like that acronym YOLO, you only live once. Um,
Yeah.
or like the Eminem song where he's like, you only get one shot, one opportunity. Um,
Right.
you better grab this moment. It's a
Yeah.
very motivational song. I think it's
Yeah.
called Lose Yourself in the Moment. So
That's
anyway,
it.
my belief is that there are no do-overs. And what I learned the hard way is that I have to leave everyone out of the discussion of who I am. And, Dr. Sarno was nothing if not trauma informed. He was actually one of the first MDs to be trauma informed. And, trauma is a universal thing from the moment where we come into the world, from the moment of birth. Um, that's a traumatic event. And so
Yeah.
when we can view childhood through the lens of, when we view childhood and complex trauma through the lens of attachment theory, whether it's, lack of attunement or attachment ruptures or disordered attachment styles, a child will always choose um, attachment over authenticity. So that means
Yep.
they will adapt in order to maintain the connection with their parents because the underlying primordial fear is abandonment. And from a brain perspective, abandonment equates with death, and connection means survival. And so, what appear to be personality traits are actually maladaptations that get baked into our personality structure over time.
Yep.
So, the more we self-sacrifice our own needs and preferences as an individual in order to conform to the expectations of others, the more inner dissonance and dissatisfaction ensues. And so what
Mm.
happens is we start suppressing our feelings, and then over time we become master repressors until it's automatic. And so all of
Yeah.
the unacceptable and intolerable emotions get cast into what Jung termed the shadow. You could also think of
Mm.
it as the unconscious. It's the dark side of the ego. And in his view, the dark side of the ego was derived from our animal past. So, after all, we are just animals. And
Mm.
from our human perspective, the animal kingdom can seem very brutal and very deadly. So what happens is the shadow side becomes like a repository or garbage can for those animalistic parts of ourselves that we don't want to admit to. And this can even show up in super subtle ways. Some people bury their emotions, others have trouble putting them into words, others become so disassociated from their emotions that the body becomes like a burial ground for these disconnected
Mm.
emotions. And the body is really just one giant unconscious mind. So you can also think of it as the external hard drive, like in a computer. It's the path of least resistance for emotions. And so the pain symptomology has a lot of functions. It simultaneously contains, conceals, defends, and expresses all of these disavowed emotions. And in other words, the body knows and the body shows. So as we see, these defenses don't actually protect us. We can't pretend to be, rational, intellectual animals all the time because we're also emotional animals, you know? And so if we don't experience the full range of emotions, we become half human in a sense. And so we pay
Yeah.
a tremendous price for being defensive. And a lot of people, have a lot of defenses, but they think they're playing it safe, but they're paying a huge price. Their world becomes very small. Their life can become very joyless. And so but here's the worst part of all, going back to the shadow. Not only are we casting off emotions that are useful and protective, emotions like rage or anger or fear, those are very protective emotions, but we're also repressing and unrealizing all of our untapped potential, as well as our talents and our dreams and all of our good characteristics. And so, what's a girl or guy to do? Well, we need to mine our shadow side and our unconscious and our past, because as the line goes, there's gold in them thar hills. And
Yeah.
another thing to recognize, and this is something your guest yesterday pointed out that Sam spoke about, which is, um, you know, doing good isn't what causes the symptoms. It's our internal conflicted response to doing good that can lead to symptoms. In other words, we have to learn to be goodists to ourselves. And we have to understand that anger and conflict are not lethal. And even if we have rage towards a loved one, it doesn't mean an absence of love. As
Hmm.
any emotion, it's not the emotion that causes symptoms, it's the secondary underlying feeling about the emotion that causes this inner battle to wage within. And it's the discomfort we have about the emotion, or the fact that we are self-critical for having it. And so
Hmm.
I'll use the word aha as like a metaphor. So like take the feeling, we'll take the emotion of rage, for example. So the rage would be the ah, and the other feeling about the rage is the ha. So it could be guilt about the rage, it could be fear of the rage, it could be grief about the rage, it could be anger towards the rage, and that's the ha. So we have to understand the primary, secondary, um, aha of
Yeah.
conflict, right? It's the conflict that causes the symptoms. It's not the emotions are safe. So if we can allow ourselves to feel those feelings and impulses, we're now relating to them in a healthy way. And then the brain learns, oh, these are safe. It's okay. You can have the impulse to throw your child out a window, but still love your child. It's okay. It doesn't mean that you're going to act on it. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you had a feeling come up. And so
Yeah.
we also need to access, a lot of people are terrified of their own anger. They're very uncomfortable with it. And we need to access our uncomfortable emotions because they're rocket fuel for change and deciding that we're worthy and we're worth fighting for. And there's this line by the poet Dylan Thomas. It goes, do not go gentle into the night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And it's a battle cry of defiance. It's a refusal to settle. It's getting angry on your own behalf. And if it weren't for the hell that I went through, I may have never had the courage to make changes. I'd still be stuck in
Right.
old life right now. And so now I know that I can channel my anger for good. I no longer need to avoid controversy or worry about the
Hmm.
displeasure of others when I'm speaking the truth. And like Muhammad Ali had a quote, it's not bragging if you have something to back it up, right? So I'm not bragging
Right.
here, I'm backing up the truth. And so, in fact, most of our greatest achievements in history were fueled by anger. Picasso
Yep.
has this wonderful quote. He wrote, "It takes courage for a man to listen to his own goodness and act on it. Do we dare to be ourselves? That is the question that counts. And so, the mind uses the body, but another important thing to understand is that the mind uses the mind in the form of
Yeah.
doubt. And it's often in this form of the super ego that morphs into this inner critic.
I
And
like that. Dare
yeah,
to be yourself. Dare to be yourself.
dare to be
That's the
ourselves.
hardest thing.
I mean, that's a
That's a,
fantastic quote from a wonderful artist. And I believe a lot of his artwork probably was imbued with anger and intense feelings. Most artists are passionate, and I'm sure Picasso was. And, I
yeah.
part of self-criticism and a negative sense of self is the belief that we're somehow damaged goods, that we're broken. But when we view ourselves through a trauma-informed lens, we realize that we're not broken or permanently damaged, but simply hurt. We're just hurt. We're hurting. That's all. And
Yeah.
so this is something, I really did to get, one of the main things I did to get better was I had to punch that inner bully in the nose. I had to disrobe the inner judge. I had to fire the inner drill sergeant, and I had to depose the inner dictator. And there's a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. It goes, "Good indignation brings out all of one's power." So by getting indignant and saying, no, you know what, bully, you know what, critic, you're fired.
Hmm. Yeah.
What happens is I took my power back. And if you want, if it feels more comfortable to you, you can also have compassion for the inner critic and the inner bully and the inner dictator and the tyrant and the judge. You can have compassion for those characters because they're actually trying to, it comes from a misplaced, misdirected desire to protect us. So the intention
Yeah.
is good, but so you can either have compassion for it and say, it's okay, I understand you're trying to help me, but I don't need your help. Or you can just get mad and say, bugger off. And so,
Yeah.
during my own recovery process, I was undergoing a 2-year long divorce process, and I was taking care of my son who has severe autism, and I still got better. And even though it took me a couple of years, just like you, Helmut,
Yeah.
it's not like I was in hell those whole 2 years.
The whole time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a gradual process of betterment. And so what I want people to understand is that it's not the stress and the life events that cause symptoms, like for example, my divorce or my son. It's our internal
Yeah.
response to the situations and our inner distress and the meaning we assign to those things, you see. And so now I'm going to venture forth more in our journey. And
Nice.
we're going to journey on to the wily, windy moors of Scotland, and
Yeah.
like the lyrics of uh, the Kate Bush song, "Wuthering Heights." I don't know if you have any Kate Bush fans. They'll know these lyrics, but basically, there's a line that goes, "Too long I roam in the night. I'm coming back to this side to put it right." So, although we don't need to excavate every single trauma or rehash past events, um,
Right.
we do need to mine our shadow side and our unconscious and our past history for gold. And symptoms are not just a distraction from emotions. They're not just a protection from perceived danger, but they're also a communication. And until that message is received and honored, symptoms have this way of hanging around. Um, and so when the wounds of our past cannot be expressed and processed emotionally, they manifest as symptoms in the body. And I was, in fact, poster child for someone who really needed to pay attention to the messengers that were my symptoms. Um, as you alluded to earlier, my whole life, I was never living in alignment with my true desires or needs. I was a
Yeah.
slave to the tyranny of the should. It was TMS, too much shoulding. And
Yeah.
what I perceived as the expectations from others, as well as, the social imperative. And my symptoms were actually serving as an objection or a protest to my own self-betrayal. And so, after I had that book cure, where I was one of those people that initially got better just from reading the books. um,
Yeah.
I had to go back to the drawing board, and I had to really plumb the depths of my emotional world. And I'm actually glad that I was forced out of my safe cage, because that cage was keeping me
Mhm.
hemmed in. And like you said before, it's it's you, it's happening for you for a reason. It had to be that dramatic. Otherwise, I wouldn't
Yeah.
have learned. And so, I think that healing from our past emotional suffering and transferring it to power so that we can change the narrative of our life also requires us to go through a grieving process and really sit where it hurts for a while. And
Yep.
we need to understand who we are and how we truly want to live. And you had this guest on, Vanessa, who,
Yep.
she poignantly described the importance of grieving to heal. Most
Mm.
of us do. It's not just grieving for lost loved ones. Loss can, as she went into great detail, it's often
Yeah.
the losses of childhood, the things that we didn't get, the
Mm.
grieving the things that we didn't get that we may have needed, throughout our lives. And whether it's in childhood or adolescence or in relationships. And one of Sarno's favorite quotes was from a poem. You might have heard this one. It was, "Pity me that the heart is slow to learn what the swift mind beholds at every turn." So it's not enough to understand things intellectually. We have to feel it in our heart,
Mm.
which can be another way of saying in our unconscious. So
Yeah.
sometimes deeper healing is in order. And, often it begins with countering the self-doubt and negative self-talk with self-empathy, which was one of the things I did. I started noticing my thoughts and my negative self-talk and the way I spoke to myself and how mean I was to myself. And I started countering that. And our symptoms are revealing to us the part of us who knows how much we've suffered. It's a cry from the soul. And
Yeah.
that core suffering self needs to be seen and heard. And until it is, symptoms have a way of hanging around and nagging us and nudging us to become more powerful and self-congruent. And we can trust the body at its word. The body never lies. It's the most empathic entity we have, and it's always honest. And so, I think people always ask, how did you get, how they want to check with, but a lot of the how was on the level of thought, changing how I thought and changing my
Yep.
relationship with myself, and really getting out of repression mode of my emotions. And emotions are,
Yeah, you're feeling the feelings and going towards the things that, well, nobody likes to feel shame or guilt, or nobody likes feeling that, right? And which is
yes,
weird. It's like, how are we ever supposed to learn this shit without a handbook, right? It's counterintuitive. Like, I don't want to feel those feelings.
we want to there's a normal human drive to avoid them because they're painful or intolerable.
Right.
And so the way a big part of TMS recovery, in my opinion, and life emotional healing and spiritual expansion is really about learning how to tolerate these emotions and relating to them in a different way, and teaching the brain that they're safe, because these emotions tell us what we want and what we need. And without this compass, we can't make fully informed decisions on how to relate to ourselves and others. So
Yeah.
if we view emotions from going back to some history, a historic perspective, um, before the advent of technology, emotions were exalted in society. If you look at Victorian literature, and all of the centuries leading up to it, um, all of literature was replete with emotions and even romanticism. And
Mm.
before there were, emojis and emoticons, there was something called floriography, and whereby the Victorians would use bouquets of flowers to communicate. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. People who like
Mm.
period pieces will know, but basically each flower would symbolize an idea or an emotion, and they would form whole messages and sentences within the bouquet. And in 1819, the first flower dictionary was published. But actually,
Wow.
even before then, floral symbolism can be found in art since the beginning of time. So that's just an example of how humans really exalted emotions. They understood the importance and how we lost it. And
Yeah.
so another really fascinating aspect of emotions that I wanted to delve into a bit is that emotional hurt and TMS symptoms are mediated by memory. So the role of memory is looms large as well, because of how we're wired. So, you know, some examples are like the way our brain records memories, stores memories, fires off memories, and as well as the ways in which our current day-to-day life will often harken back to past emotional themes that seem to repeat themselves over and over and over until we finally get the message. They tend to echo into the
Yep.
present. And so Freud called this phenomena repetition compulsion. And we recreate themes from our past in a subconscious desire to reassert control or to repair past traumas. So it's something we do without realizing it. And another fascinating question is, how does the brain decide what to remember and what to forget? So it makes a choice based on the emotions attached to the memory. So
Yeah.
the emotional overlay is what causes us to remember or to forget. And it's a form of self-protection that has its roots in evolution. And there's a scientist, Dr. Candace Pert. She wrote Molecules of Emotion. She's considered the mother of psychoneuroimmunology, and
Mm.
she was a pioneer in she studied chemical peptides in the brain. And she wrote, there's a quote from her, the cave woman who could remember which cave had the gentle guy who gave her food is more likely to be our foremother than the cave woman who confused it with the cave that held the killer bear. So the emotions of love and safety and the emotions of fear would help secure her memories in a sense. And it becomes
Mm-hmm.
an emotional signature of her nervous system in a way. And so
Yeah.
when we can see how we truly suffered and how certain beliefs were born out of these experiences, we can finally understand ourselves, and then we can start to change. We need to understand our own psychology in order to change. And it's not a checklist that somebody else did. You have to understand,
Right.
go within. It's an inside job. You have to really be curious and care about how you think and how you feel. And so you have to, you have to go within. And I know a lot of people don't like hearing that, but
Yeah.
the truth. And, our history matters. And I just want to say that there's dignity in facing your history. You don't have to avoid it. We can't change what happened, but we can heal its effects on us today. And in so doing, we expunge those emotional wounds at the causal level. And there's a beautiful quote by Freud that echoes this sentiment. He wrote, "One day, in retrospect, the years of struggle will strike you as the most beautiful. So once
Mm.
we have fully embraced and reckoned with our past hurts, we can start deciding what we want and don't want. And we can improve the relationship we have with ourselves and others. And
Yeah.
we can get out of a power struggle with our body, and we can choose what feels right to us at any given moment. And so like I'll give you some examples of myself, how I got better. One example was, becoming more assertive. Um,
Mhm.
I used to be one of those people that, for example, if I was in the supermarket and somebody was blocking me with their car and I just really needed to get through the aisle, I didn't want to bother that person because I didn't want to rush them. So I would pretend to like look at the applesauce on the shelf. Oh, cinnamon apples, just because I'm so avoidant,
I
right?
do that still. I still do that shit.
I'm a work, listen, I'm a work in process, a progress. And I want to say something else about emotional healing. It's till we die. So we're always works in process. We're
Mhm.
always expanding spiritually, but you can be pain free. I mean, you can be free of symptoms, but you're always going to be growing emotionally. So, in addition to this inner critic I had and all these self-imposed pressures and demands, um, that I had. There's also, I wanted to touch on the social imperative again. And
Mhm.
we discussed a little bit the last time about, uh, Facebook groups and such, and some of the negativity and the aggression. But there's this other really insidious thing in society, which is toxic positivity. And it's just another form of avoiding emotions. So you know, um, if you're following some kind of script or you're looking for some checklist, just know that it's another defense. You're avoiding again. And so
Mhm.
in our last, video, we talked about some of those Facebook support groups that are like crabs in a bucket, where people just constantly want to pull each other down, and they promote victimhood and enabling. and and we talked a little bit about how people can get really rabid and self-destructive with their aggression, and sometimes when their pseudoscience belief system is challenged, they can get very upset due to the fact that their whole identity and sense of community and belonging is wrapped up in that stuff. But
Right.
but there's also another sneaky type of group. I have to
Mhm.
mention this story.
Sure.
So these groups ostensibly are for support, but the suppression in these groups is so extreme that members are relegated to only speaking in vague platitudes about things like gratitude and chamomile tea. And I heard your guest yesterday talking about chamomile tea. And
Yeah.
so like
I drink it every day. I love chamomile.
like the photo, what do they call that? The banner on the group would be like chamomile tea, and and gratitude, no, platitudes and gratitude, blah blah blah, right? And so I'm just going to ramble a bit here, but I might go on some detours. But there, the director, Martin Scorsese, the film
Yep.
director, he directed Taxi Driver and Mean Streets, like really bloody, gory, gritty films, 1970s. So he actually said that his most violent work of all his films was The Age of Innocence, which, if you see that movie, it's all about polite upper crust society and flowers. Everybody's uber polite. There's no blood, there's no gore. Nobody
Right.
even insults anyone, right? He said that was the most violent one of his movies. Why? Because the main character in the movie had no outlet for his rage within these polite social mores within which he lived. And so
Yeah.
violence and the suppression of this society was such that he had to make decisions not based on his heart's desires, but based on what was expected of him. And when we
Mm.
betray ourselves, it is an act of violence. So
Yep.
getting to this, this group of platitudes of gratitude with chronic pain, it has an enormous number of members, and I tried to post my success story blog, which is it's a short blog, and
Yeah.
they took it down immediately. And so basically all of these poor people in this group, we're talking thousands and thousands of people, are there
Yep.
feeling lonely, but they're prohibited from talking about the elephant in the room, which is that they are in physical and emotional pain. They're not allowed to talk about that. So these
Right.
groups are subcultures that create an illusion of community where there really is none. And the message that they're conveying is shut up and cope, basically. And
Yeah.
if we look at social media in general, the price of admission for belonging to any type of group, there's different types of social currency, if you will, whether it's victimhood, repression, toxic positivity, or presenting a fake persona. That's the price you pay to have, quote, safety, to belong. And but it's a huge price to pay, as you know. And so
Yeah.
another issue that I see a lot in society that that really, you see this a lot in some of the spiritual circles,
Hmm.
or religious, or you see this a lot. Um, I'm trying to think. You see this a lot in pop psychology. This notion that we have to forgive in order to heal. That if we don't forgive, that we won't heal. That's a total crock. So
Yeah.
another form of suppression right there. We cannot always afford to give forgiveness, nor is everything forgivable. And that's just the
Yeah.
truth. And, sometimes we might never reach a time where we forget. We might be on our deathbed and forgive, we might not. It really depends on the person, it depends on the circumstances, and it's all okay. Whether you do eventually, or you never do, or you don't want to, it's all okay. You don't have to, you're not obligated to forgive. Um, and so I just think it's important to liberate people from um, that fear-based idea that if they don't forgive, they can't heal. That causes it's a
Sometimes it makes
depression.
sometimes it makes it worse. If you forgive something, that can cause more conflicts in yourself.
Well,
Your
absolutely.
authentic self.
Yeah, because you're abandoning yourself. It's a form of self-abnegation. You're basically saying that the perpetrator or the abuser deserves more than you. And that's a very um that's an act of violence towards a self. In my opinion, it's a form of
Yeah.
self-abuse. And
Yeah.
so yeah, and I think another example of emotional healing, which is a big part of healing from TMS or just um, life's trials and tribulations, is acceptance of things that we can't control. I had to, for example, myself, I had to accept my son's autism. It was very difficult
Yeah.
for the first years of his life. My son became a science project, basically. It was during the era of Jenny McCarthy and all the biomedical protocols. And so I was frantically trying to fix him, following all of these
Mm.
protocols and diets and giving him shots and all, um, it was, it was traumatic in and of itself. And so, if I think that accepting who my son is, for who he is, and not viewing him through the lens of a pathology or pathologizing him, was healing for me, but also for our relationship. So acceptance
Yeah.
is a very big piece, and I might touch on that again. But so I just wanted to um, go. I kind of ended our journey, but I wanted to go through five. I wrote down like five tools, or yeah, no, five ways of promoting healing of my own
Yes.
that I could recommend. Because I know people
Yes.
like
Good.
they're like, skip this psychology lecture. Tell me how. So, but I just want to say it's important. You have to, the psychoeducational piece is incredibly crucial. in order to, if you skip that, you're going to have gaps in your knowledge and you're going to fall into those gaps. So don't skip
Yeah.
education. It's really, really important. And you have to be curious about yourself. So anyway,
Mhm.
I know you do a lot of visualizations, Helmet,
Yep.
and that's a way we can, recreate, oh, I'm sorry, that we can create from the unknown by visualizing.
Yep.
But I just wanted to offer a few more ideas along that vein, and I have five. Um, I have more than five, but I'm just going to talk about five right now. So I'll be here for 10 hours. So, one way of promoting healing is through memory. And
Mhm.
two of my tools have something to do with our past and memory. And I've always had this fascination with the subject of nostalgia because it's this bitter sweet experience. I actually wrote 3 blogs on nostalgia. That's how fascinated I am about nostalgia. Um,
Nostalgia.
yeah, and a fun fact is that nostalgia was actually considered a medical diagnosis at one time. So it was coined in 1688 by a Swiss physician. And the symptomology included rumination, melancholia, insomnia, anxiety, and loss of appetite. And
Mm.
initially, it was associated with like soldiers and sailors that were off at war. But then in the early 1900s, it was considered to be a debilitating illness. And
Mm.
the etymology of the word nostalgia is it's Greek for nostos means nest, and algia means pain. So the object of the nostalgic state could be one's homeland, but it could also include non-spatial things like loved ones, carefree times, holidays, etc.
Yeah.
And we've all had that experience of a sudden memory wash over us from like a scent or from a flavor of food, that
Mm.
feeling. And these fragmented memories is what Proust called. He called them souls in the vast edifice of memory. So it's like our brains are like an archive building of souls, if you will. So that's a
Yeah.
way of putting it. So the first tool I have involves the bitter part of the memory. So it's bitter and sweet. So the bitter part is it's this is also tied to Carl Jung. It's a form of narrative therapy. And Jung was very big on that. And a powerful way that we can integrate our past trauma to move forward is to mourn and bear witness, like Vanessa said, to our own lives, to mourn and bear witness through narrative therapy. And that can be done different ways. But storytelling is very important. Jung understood the importance of it. Brene Brown has a quote: storytelling is an act of courage. Um, I've had um, I've had even clients who are professional writers. One gentleman wrote about his experience with his son, who was very similar to my son, and it's an act of
Yeah.
courage. It's not easy to write, but the goal is to understand ourselves as well as to give ourselves permission to dream again. So we want to change the narrative. Now, I'm not saying you have to journal every day. This is not journaling. Basically, what I use is a simple tool or technique that Dr. Dan Ratner devised. It's a 3-paragraph core narrative. So it's only 3 paragraphs, and you can make a really short, concise one, or you can make more of a long Charles Dickensonian one, which is my tendency. I tend to write long ones, but whatever you like. And basically, it's a creative act that,
Yep.
similar to visualizing, it encapsulates the story of you and your core suffering self through
Yep.
a fair and accurate lens, not the unfair, distorted one. So, in fact, I would say that the degree of emotional recovery matches the degree to which our story is complete, emotionally congruent, and told from a self-sympathetic perspective. And
Yeah.
yeah, Fellini, who's my favorite director. I talk a lot about movies, but Fellini had this quote, all art is autobiographical. The pearl is the oyster's autobiography. So your core narrative can become your pearl or your crown jewel of self-empathy in a sense. And we need to grieve and we need to have self-compassion to heal. It's a huge part of emotional healing. It's a huge part of disabling symptoms that are that cry from the soul. And so by redefining our self story to the hero's journey, um,
Yeah.
we can bring all of these emotional themes, all of these abandoned parts of ourselves, all of the untapped potential from the shadow into the light of consciousness and towards our path to power. And that is how we change the narrative. So that's a tool I really enjoy with my clients, and it's about the bitter part of memory. Now, the second tool, which relates to the sweet part of memory, is another thing you can do, and it's similar to visualizing, is drawing from specific happy memories, even tiny, seemingly small or brief memories. So this has been substantiated by neuroscience studies that have demonstrated actual physiological changes from
Yeah.
culling happy, nurturant memories. And there was this fascinating study conducted in the 80s. I don't know if you've heard of this study. It was a time travel study. Did you hear about that? Um,
No, but I did time traveling in my visuals and I made them
okay.
up.
Okay, so you're going to like this. So they did this amazing time travel study, and it really demonstrated the powerful effect of memory and belief on the physiology. And so what they did
Yeah.
was took a group of men, and they were all like in their 70s and 80s, and kind of like old timers, and they placed them in a full immersion time travel retreat for a week. And it was designed to recreate the year of 1959. And
Mm.
during that time, the guys would reminisce and they would listen, they would live in conditions sort of set up to simulate the period they would pipe in music and food and
Oh,
fashion, and they would dress a certain way. They had the decor, everything. And so then a series of cognitive and physical tests were performed, and the results were dramatic improvements in strength, gait, flexibility, hearing, vision, and even IQ in just 1 week. I
yeah.
mean,
Well,
yeah,
I'll give you my example. I used to do past memory visuals of my life and then future visuals. But then I got bored of my past ones because I used them too much. I'm like, oh, I'm tired of it. My brain would get bored and wander off, right? And I would speak it into my phone. So then I was like, what can I do to get inventive? So um, I went to this channel, Nemo's Dreamscapes, and he
yes, I was
had,
going to mention that actually. Yeah.
yeah, he would have awesome scenes of like the 1930s, 40s,
Yep.
50s with music. So then I
Yep.
would play it on my tablet, listen to it, and I would pretend like I'm visiting a past life from another time that I lived. And I would get into it and really sit in the dose of it. And it was
Mhm.
so easy. The juices would start flowing. Right? I
You
didn't even
know,
have to put much effort into it. And it felt
yeah.
so nice. Right?
It's so funny because I came across Nemo's Dreamscape before I heard you mention it. And I was like, this
Yeah.
is so cool because it's very evocative. They have like cool music and sound effects and scenes, and some of it's a little bit, it is very nostalgic and it's very retro.
Yeah.
It's sort of like, growing up, I used to watch like the Jetsons and Fred
Yes.
Flintstone, and it was sort of like the 60s idea of what the future would look like. So it had this,
Right.
it has this, it's kind of cartoonish, but it's kind of comforting, and it's
Oh, yes.
creates safety for the brain. And so,
It's not just because we experience we're visiting something that we experience and makes us feel good, like the 80s or whatever, but it
mm,
has this weird spiritual, I don't, it's hard. It depends if people believe in this kind of stuff or not. But
mm,
it's like, if, like I'd watch a video of something that was happening in the 30s, and it feels like I lived it. It's this weird, haunting, happy.
Yes, yes,
comforting, like I
yes,
lived it.
we can have nostalgia for times that we were not living in. So like I'm
Right.
very nostalgic for the 1960s Dolce Vita of Italy, but I wasn't born yet. But I have tremendous nostalgia for it. So
Right. And
it's,
my
it's
beliefs, I have spiritual beliefs that I've been reincarnated and it fits that, my beliefs. So they just dance together. And I'm like, I bet you I lived at once upon a time in a different lifetime. And it feels like home. It feels like, it's so
yeah,
weird.
well, I think sometimes we have an affinity towards things and it can feel like home. And that's what we
Yep.
want to cultivate. It's a way of cultivating safety for the brain. And I think that the more,
Exactly.
we all have access to positive memories and we can activate those pathways and let the negative ones grow weaker through attrition. So if we keep, activating the ones that involve social interaction, especially, they reshape how we see ourselves. Memories like receiving applause or baking cookies with your grandma, or falling
Mm,
in love, or your first kiss, or enjoying a vacation. And you can put them in little headings like romance, safety, tranquility, victory, connection, resilience. And you can look at your little memories and it will naturally kindle these feelings of home and gratitude and motivation. And it's also been shown to increase productivity and decrease your feelings of loneliness and separation. So, this is especially true when you're distracted by symptoms. This is when it's precisely in those moments that we need to remember who we really are, and that these sensations are just a transient experience. It's not our identity. And
yep.
so those are two tools involving memory, the bitter and the sweet. And then I have a third tool, which is something I totally did, which was I acted as if. So it's a form of that visualization because I would go about my day and make decisions based on the premise that I was already fine. And so my behavior had to match that. And so it's a form of outcome independence, really. And I thought of myself as already fine, even though it hadn't manifested physically yet the way I wanted to see it. Right? So I had to really believe I was already okay and that these symptoms were just temporary. And so I think your guest yesterday spoke a little bit about this waiting for it to happen period, this time lag where it seems like nothing's happening because you're still getting the symptoms. The brain is still doing its shtick for a while, but you have to really accept and trust that if you remain consistent with how you think and your belief that you're okay, they will
Yep.
eventually fade out.
Yep.
Sort of like I have a friend, my friend Joseph. Um, he he used this analogy. I think it's a great analogy. He's Mexican, and he was saying that when he goes to family parties, there's tons of people at the parties, and so he doesn't want to have to say goodbye to everybody at the party because it would take 3 hours. So he kind of like sneaks out the back door. And that's what symptoms do. Symptoms are like leaving a big Mexican party. They do it
Yes.
imperceptibly. And so
And
yeah,
that's when you know you're doing it right, when you haven't even noticed that symptom left 6 months ago. That's when you know you've you've gained the leverage to become indifferent, which takes time to get there. You just can't just be indifferent. But
no,
when you're
no,
indifferent,
no,
you actually
no,
don't
you can't be
care.
there right away. You
Yeah,
have to start somewhere, which is usually
right.
just being nice to yourself and saying, I know, I'm just not going to freak out. Like for me, if I organized my sock drawer, that was a success. If I got to the bathroom,
Yep.
it was a success. So, um, yes, I didn't measure my progress based on, um, uh, I didn't measure my progress based on my symptoms or based on what I accomplished.
Right.
I based my progress on how low my fear was. So if my fear was lower, that was a win. If I managed to go to the bathroom or arrange my socks, that was a win. And I was going in the right
Yeah.
direction. So I was very patient with myself. And I
Yep.
didn't rush myself. And the fourth tool worth mentioning, and it's something that all the MDs in the field preach, is making time for guiltless pleasure. So
Mm,
if you have TMS, most likely the joy has been sucked out of your days. And Dr. Sarno had this term, the rage to soothe ratio. And basically, it means that we need to inject more silliness and comedy and music and um, pleasure, sports, vacations, socializing. We need to inject those things. And by doing so, you unite that mind that's been divided between guilt and pleasure, because it's like the name of his book is The
yep.
Divided Mind. So if we can you know instill these or weave into our day to day these forms of pleasure, it really makes a big difference. A lot of times people will tell me, I don't have a lot of stress, but there's a sort of joylessness about my existence. It lacks joy or meaning. So it's really important. And I think um, I've said this often. I think music is very underrated. I
Oh,
think
yes.
I think silliness is really underrated. I think that's why, I think people are drawn to you, Helmut, because you can be silly sometimes, and we need to have a sense of humor. We need to be silly. We can't
Yep.
always worry about how we look, or look
Right.
proper, right?
Yep.
So
And
it's
and
okay.
with like dancing, I was trying to hardwire happiness, but in the beginning, while I was dancing, I wasn't happy. So there was resistance I was going through. You're gonna experience resistance with this whole journey, no matter what you do. But
Right.
I had to think greater than I felt. I had to smile like a crazy person, even when I wasn't feeling great. But eventually, it started to catch on, and then I authentically felt happy while I was dancing.
That's true, and that's part of acting as if, because you have
Yeah.
to do the thing to feel the thing, right?
Yep.
You have to believe before you see. And that's the problem. A
Yeah.
lot of people, which is what your guest yesterday was saying, a lot of people want to see before they believe.
Instantly.
Like, prove it to
Yeah.
me. Tell me how you did it. That's not how this process works. It's a psychological process, and it's going to look different for every person. Every person has to address two things, though: their thoughts and their emotions. As I said earlier, their intellect and their emotions. So that applies to everybody. What that looks like exactly is going to vary, because we're idiosyncratic. We're all different. Um,
Yeah.
the fifth tool I had written down was, and I think this is the most high octane tool, in my opinion, and both in terms of reversing symptoms and healing emotionally. And that is the tool of choice. On one stage or stratum, I'll kind of try to display it. So you have up here the influences of history, society, culture, and learned conditioning from our family, our peers, media. And on the other plane, we have we have evolution, genetics, biology. And so from the time we're born, from the time we're conceived to the time we die, these two forces influence us. And what's in between these two forces? In between, we have our own choices. We have free will and we have self-determination. So beyond society and beyond biology, my behavior and my experience is caused by me ultimately, right? So ultimately, it's not science or medicine that heals people. It's belief and acceptance.
Yeah.
And so, I'm here to extend my unshakable belief in you, the viewer that's watching, but your viewers. And, as Glinda said to Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz, she had this quote, like, you don't need to be helped any longer. And she says, "You've always had the power, my dear." And to which Dorothy responds, "I have?" And then the Scarecrow asks, "Then why didn't you tell her before?" And Glinda's response is, "Because she wouldn't have believed me." And she had to learn it for herself. And this really sums up the journey. You can trust yourself because all of your power does lie within. Or as Goethe wrote, he's like the German Shakespeare. He wrote this great quote, trust in yourself, and then you will know how to live. And
Yeah.
so it's all right there. Um, we have to there's some trial and error involved. You have to figure out who you are, what you want,
Yeah.
what resonates with you, how your psychology works.
So these five methods, did you have like a routine with them, or did you just
No, um, no, I didn't. I really didn't have a routine. I just every day I became more observant of my thoughts. I started to get rid of all those false beliefs I had.
yeah,
And as I said before, I got rid of the inner critic and the judge and the dictator and the shoulding. Um,
yeah,
I
feeling
also,
the feelings?
yeah, I had therapy, I had coaching therapy,
Yeah,
where I gave myself permission to identify and connect with those emotions and genuinely relate to those emotions rather than repressing them.
great.
What else did I do? I made some practical changes in my life, and not everybody
Right.
wants to hear this, but in my particular case, I had to make some. My life was not. Um, my relationship with myself was not good, and
Yeah.
I was not being true to myself, and things were out of whack, and I wasn't living according to my own. There was a lack of self-allegiance, if you will. And so I I got to this point where I said, between now and dead, I don't want to keep repeating what I've been doing. And so, that entailed some practical things. Um,
Plus, you were out of a relationship. You were going through a divorce.
yes, yes, yes.
Would you say was that relationship just one of those that didn't work out, or was it toxic, or was
No, it was just I had been married for 16 years and I didn't feel emotionally fulfilled or safe. My therapist asked me when I felt, no, mind you, he wasn't beating me or anything.
right?
He's a good father. We speak every day. Um,
Yeah.
but I wasn't, for a long time, I felt this lack of emotional connection that I was yearning for. I was yearning for emotional intimacy. And I
Yeah.
don't blame him. It's not his fault. It's nobody's fault. It's just, you know,
Right. That's
common,
why I asked. Like
yeah.
sometimes relationships, it's just time for them to move on. But then there's also relationships that are toxic where people uh stick together, even though and they kind of they're in denial of, why they're still sick, why they're not getting better. And then they use the
Yes.
brain retraining as a weapon to get rid of symptoms when they have a liger in the room and the brain is
Yes.
acting accordingly.
Yes. That's a form, unfortunately, they're, TMSing about TMS, if you will,
Yeah.
um, or trying to heal. Trying to heal is not healing. True healing is to forget about healing and really confront the real issues, which is, um, you know, your false beliefs, your habitual thoughts, the way you talk to yourself, the way you relate
Mhm.
to yourself, the way you relate to others, um, the way, you might be in a power struggle with your body. Um, in order to heal, we have to stop TMSing about TMS. And a lot of people will use various programs or approaches, or they get very bogged down in the weeds of, um, do I do this program or that program? Do I need to do this or that? And they start polling people for what they did. And my advice is to really simplify, because most of the action is really in your own mind and how you think. And whatever tools you want to use, that's fine, but they shouldn't be the centerpiece. They should just be things that promote recovery, or things that optimize your life in some way, or that they help you grieve, or whatever the case may be. But it's not for getting rid of symptoms.
Right.
Um,
Using it as a weapon, or for me, uh, if I ask this, I can ask them, I can say, I can answer this question. I can be like, am I able to do this as a lifestyle and enjoy what I'm doing? I'm like, yes. All the methods that I use, I enjoy them. And it's become a lifestyle. When other people, they're doing things because they have to get rid of, and they're ignoring the liger that's in the room, right?
what happens is they're efforting. They're no longer
Yeah.
on the path. They're just efforting, which is resistance, which is the opposite of acceptance and belief and allowing. So, it's
Yeah.
I think
And
that,
sometimes there's desperation because the time's ticking, the relationship is crumbling. I better hurry up and heal because I'm walking
yes,
on eggshells. I'm pretending to be normal. And why isn't this going away? I got to hurry up and heal.
yes, we have to flip the script, because people have this tendency to think, oh, if I didn't have these symptoms, my relationship would be awesome, my life would be great. It's the opposite. You wouldn't have these symptoms to begin with if things were working for you the way you needed them to. If you were okay with yourself, you wouldn't have the symptoms. So it's definitely a paradigm shift, and it's magical thinking. It's like somebody who needs to lose weight and they say, I don't want to go on a date until I lose weight. Then they're never going to lose weight. You have to do the thing, and then as a byproduct, the rest
Right.
happens. And
Exactly.
what was the other thing I was going to say? I had another point. There was something I wanted to say about, there was something you mentioned. The efforting and the trying. Oh, yes, the avoidance. So I think sometimes people, I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, but there's a part of us that doesn't want to do the work, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of want somebody else to do it for us, but a coach or a therapist, or a group or a program can only guide you and collaborate with you, and troubleshoot and play detective. But ultimately, you have to dig deep within. Um, and sometimes I think people prefer, um, I don't know, obfuscating with the TMS stuff and going into the groups and spinning their wheels, and trying to poke holes in people's theories, rather
Yep.
than um, really focusing on the truths of their lives. We have to go from illusion to truth. And
Yep.
I most of my clients, when by the time they found me, they're very ready. So I rarely encounter that in my coaching. But I a long time ago, I had a consultation with somebody, and I spent a great deal of time with her. And there was this elephant in the room. She was in a terribly abusive um, marriage for many, many years, and it was just terrible. And I could tell she was very not approach. She was very unapproachable with that topic, and I didn't want to overstep, or I didn't want to. I was sensitive to that, but I did have to bring up the subject. You're in this
Mm.
narrative. I didn't want to trigger her, or re-traumatize her, but it was something that, I said, this is something you're going to have to address at some point, you know. And
Yeah.
I think she freaked out, and we had made an appointment, and she canceled it at the last minute.
Yep.
And I said, can I ask you what? Because I like to get feedback. Can I ask you why? Because
Yeah.
I spent a long time speaking to her. And she said, I didn't like what you said about Lyme disease. And I'm like, I spoke for 2 hours. I think I talked about Lyme disease for 1 second out of those two. It was like the most trivial detail in the entire discussion. I think it was mentioned in
She
passing.
didn't want to talk about it. Yeah.
And
She didn't
she's
want
like,
to talk about it. Yeah.
yeah. She's like, I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. Well, that's totally fine. I'm always here if you want to talk. But it was so odd because it she was evading the truth. She was avoiding it.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's just an example. But I think that when
I can
we,
understand. I can
yeah,
understand why people would want to do that. Because I try to put myself in the shoes and I'm like, oh yeah, I don't want to open that can. That's too much to, I don't want to face that mountain. I don't want to climb. That's
yeah,
exhausting. That's too, oh,
yeah. And sometimes they attack the cure. How do I put this? It's almost like they attack the helper or the approach as a threat. Like the
yeah,
helper and the approach is supposed to be there to quote cure you. It's not a threat. Um, and so that's a very unfortunate pitfall that people can fall into. Um, and it's a form of doubt. It's self-destructive doubt, essentially.
yep,
And when you start attacking helpers and approaches, you don't have much chance of getting better because you're focusing on you're not focusing on the right thing. You're focusing on all the reasons why you can't get better or why things didn't work. You have to shift your focus. And
yeah. They're trying to justify, uh, their wrong approach. They're trying to make it the right approach, and they don't want to. Yeah, it's triggering for them. And
yeah,
some of these people, especially these Facebook Karens, they're so miserable. They're single. They're, living a horrible life for the past 27 years. And they get triggered and angry. They want everybody else in that
yeah.
44,000 member group to be the same. And if you talk about recovery, how fucking dare you? You know what I mean?
Well, I think in that case, it's because we're
It's not
threatened.
fair. It's just not fair.
We're threatening their belief systems, and people become
Yeah.
very uh, um, self-protectively aggressive when you challenge their
Yeah.
sense of identity or their sense of belonging. And to some of these people, these groups are it's really sad, but it's their whole sense of self are wrapped up in these. It's almost like their family, and you're challenging that, and they don't like that because to them that's safety. But of course, it's an illusion of safety. It's a prison, and they
Yeah.
don't realize that. So it's very sad. Um, and so I would recommend anyone, like if you're having thoughts of um, let's say you're feeling like you don't want to do the work, or you're feeling jealous, or you're feeling angry, or you're feeling triggered, or you're feeling competitive. Don't let those thoughts go unchecked because they're doubt. Those are doubt thoughts. And going back to the river of doubt, those are doubts. We have to fight that for your own benefit. Um, and I would say, that the last thing I just want to point out a little bit more spiritual is that um, a lot of times people think that their life is over when they have TMS symptoms, and it's to the contrary. All of this is happening so that you can have a better life ultimately. And
Yeah.
when we accept that everything happens to us for our own, it's designed for our own spiritual growth. It totally changes your attitude towards the pain and the symptoms. And
Yeah.
after all, we're not just a mind and a body. We also are embodied spirits. We have souls. And
Yeah.
so when we can connect to that, whether you think of it as a heart space or a connection to God or the universe, when you have that extra layer, when you have that secure attachment, it adds another layer of safety. And within that
Hmm.
safety, you can finally surrender. And that is the most powerful state you can be in. is the state of surrender, because when we do that, we let go of the struggle, we give up the fight. And
Right.
that is ultimately, knowing that, whether it's God has your back or the universe has your back, or you can trust your own inner self. Um, it just, it liberates you. It brings an end to the struggle. And
Right.
so, yeah, I mean, healing really does come from acceptance and belief, not from a program or a science or any of that. So,
Well, we're surrounded by a 3D reality that's lying to us, whether it's Google or your symptoms,
yeah,
smokes and mirrors. So you're forced to tap in to the spiritual side to get you across to the other side by going over the invisible bridge, or that you're out to sea and that you have that spiritual lighthouse to guide you because you have nothing else. Everything is lying to you, so you're forced to tap in, which is a great thing. Finally,
yes,
you're forced to do it.
I think so, because so much of what there's so much we can't see in this earthly plane, that is, but it is
Yeah.
still doesn't make it less true. And there's so much we get tricked by on this earthly plane that we think is truth, but it's illusion. And that includes symptoms. Even if you have visual symptoms like swelling or redness, like I did, or crazy visuals, it's not pointing you towards the truth. It's pointing you towards the effect. So you have to realize that it's often the things that we can't see that are the most real.
Right. They are they're everything. They're everything.
Yeah, we get too caught up in what we can see with our eyes, and
Right.
there's just so much more. And so that's where I get a little bit spiritual with that. But
No, it's true.
it's part of it.
Big time. Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered a ton, Helmet. I hope I didn't talk your ears off too much.
No, I'm sure we can. There's going to be other things that we can cover in the next round. So I'm thinking in a couple of months we'll have you back,
Sure.
and we can hit up some of the gruesome shit that you've been through.
Okay.
'Cause that can help. That can help people. Somebody going, "Oh my God, I feel the same
Yeah,
thing."
or
Like,
any
"Oh my God."
questions that people would
Yeah.
like.
And anybody has questions, we'll tackle them.
Yeah, and because getting people's questions answered also adds safety to the brain, and
Right.
I'm happy to do that. And anybody can, if you want to reach out to me with a question, I'm happy to answer. So,
Yeah. We're
um,
trying to get we're trying to get all the questions that we can, and sometimes we might miss some things, but that's why we'll just keep this going.
yeah, yeah,
Awesome.
I would be thrilled to return. Thanks so much
Awesome.
for having me again, and
Thanks for being on the show.
and thanks for all the work you do, Helmet. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.